You're listening to Raincoast Radio. Welcome to More Than a Fish, Season 2 of Raincoast Radio. I'm Sofia Osborne, and I'm the producer for Raincoast Radio. And I'm joined by Auston Chhor today, who is usually our host, but I'm filling that seat today. A little bit about me is I am a PhD student at UBC, and I'm also a writer, editor, and audio producer. And working on Raincoast Radio is one of my favorite parts of my job for sure. So anyway, thanks so much for joining me, Auston.
Thank you.
How does it feel to be on that side of the interview?
It feels very weird, especially in person.
Yeah, we're actually in person today, which is exciting. Yeah, so let's kick it off with the question that you always ask at the beginning, Auston. Where are your home waters?
Ooh, I would say my home waters are back in Ontario. I grew up in Ontario. I just moved to BC in 2021. But where I grew up wasn't like in a watershed, or I don't know, there were like wetlands maybe, but it's just a subdivision north of Toronto. And there wasn't that much, there wasn't a very specific water body that I was connected to growing up, but it was like my third year of university. I started working at a biological station near Kingston. And there's this like beautiful research station on a lake in Eastern Ontario called Lake Opinican. And yeah, we got to spend so much time on the lake, I was an undergrad, just like helping out all these different researchers do all their different research. So we'd be like one day catching turtles in one of these bays, and the other day like be mapping bird habitat in another. And it was, I would say Lake Opinican are my home waters. It's kind of where I got my start in fishery science too. And just like so many days spent out exploring all I guess here in BC, the lakes are just a circle or an oval and very easy to understand. But in Ontario, there are these like insane networks of like spiderwebby canals and back bays and like islands. And yeah, we spent so much time just like exploring and jumping off cliffs. And yeah, I would say that Lake Opinican.
Sounds very, very nice. And so you've talked about your master's research a bit in various episodes, but I'd love to hear more about like what did that research entail? Where was it?
Yeah, so I always like to say like the thesis question of my master's research was, does catch and release angling affect fish? So what happens to fish once you let them go? And what can anglers do to make sure there's better outcomes when they do let them go? So in Ontario, there's a large recreational fishery for bass and other kinds of sport fish like pike and walleye. And a lot of this fishery is centered around catch and release, like just the pure act of going out there, flipping your presentation into the water and like catching the fish and then releasing them. That's the whole, not many people eat bass. There's not a big food fishery for northern pike like there are for salmon out here. And so like understanding what happens to these fish once you let them go and whether or not, obviously there is an impact, whether or not the angler can make a change in how they do their fishing practice for the better was part of the research. And so we did a lot of work on Lake Opinican as well as in Quebec on this. It was a nature reserve and almost like a fishing resort called Canuck. And yeah, like we had two chapters. The first one was we made these, it's kind of like a proof of concept where we made these, we called them fish bits. And so they were these activity monitors that you could attach to a fish externally and really quick with just Velcro. And then we would attach a line to that Velcro band and you'd be able to monitor what the fish does after you catch them and let them go. And then that line, would be free spooling and the fish would be swimming away doing its own thing. And then what was really unique about this whole project was that we didn't have to do any like surgery or like sewing or any like invasive attachment, because a lot of techniques for studying what happens to fish when you let them go are very invasive and can impact the fish. And so we had this really cool, it's basically like a Velcro wristband. And then, we could peel it off wherever the fish was and reel it back in. So that was the first chapter. In the second chapter, we looked at the effect of flow and water temperature on how rainbow trout recover after they're released. So we would like catch these rainbow trout, and then we would have different experiments where we'd either just let them go right away, where we'd hold them in a cooler with like kind of cold water before letting them go. Another one where we had this like tank that would push fresh water through it, and they could hang out in there and recover before we let them go. And we actually found that when we held them in cold water and in the flow, they did better after they were released compared to if you were to just release them right away, which we thought was interesting because it was kind of like against the grain where like conventional thinking is handle them for as little time as possible. But yeah, we found that like if we did these certain little things, they did better after. So yeah, that was my master's research. It's really interesting.
Yeah, were there any other findings from your research that were interesting?
Yeah, I mean, I think that one was the most interesting. The first chapter kind of solidified the very well-known fact that fish don't like being out of water. But I guess what we did find that was interesting was that certain fish are more hardy or tolerant to being out of water for like up to 3-5 minutes. But then, we also found that the typical interaction with the fish where when it's caught and, somebody wants to take a picture with it, measure it, the whole time that the fish needs to be out of the water was like 20 seconds max. And we did a lot of these releases where we would mock like catching them, measuring them, taking a picture and time to see how long that would take. And so we can make guidelines to how long you should realistically be keeping a fish out of water, which is like maximum like 20 seconds, right? Yeah.
Right. And so what brought you from Ontario, studying fish in these lakes out here to the West Coast and studying salmon?
Yeah, I think so. I joined this lab in Ontario at Carleton University because I saw that they were doing really cool research out on the West Coast with salmon, and there's a couple PhD students working. I think it was the Bulkley River with sockeye, and I was like, when I was a undergrad, I was like, oh, I want to do that. I want to do that research, and so applied to join this lab, and then my supervisor was like, hey, you want to work on bass? So I was kind of disappointed there, but yeah, the kind of like ultimate goal was to move out here and work on salmon just because I thought they were such cool fish. And yeah, and I had like never been out west before until I actually like moved here. And so it was kind of this like mythical place that, there's mountains and there's oceans and glaciers and none of the things we have in Ontario. So yeah.
And did it live up to your expectations?
Oh, yeah.
Good. Yeah. And so what brought you to Raincoast?
Yeah, this is interesting. So I was working at a consulting company before I joined Raincoast, and that was my first job moving out here. And working quite a bit around BC Hydro projects, which is really interesting, but I really wanted to get more into like the research side of things and work more with salmon. I was working a lot with trout, bull trout at this company. And I think I really thought that Raincoast's like structure and how they operate was really cool, where that, we're an NGO, we're a nonprofit, but we also have we're all scientists first, which I thought was cool. I thought scientists could only go to either the government or go work for a consulting company or go to a university. I didn't know, there were these like other options for scientists. And I just thought like the work they did was like super cool and like really varied, that there's a salmon program, but there's also forests and whales and there's a boat and there's a education program. And yeah, that's kind of what brought me there.
And what did you sort of start working on at first with Raincoast?
Yeah, so this is like inside lore. I actually applied, it was like my 100th application. I applied for my colleague Allison's position. Well, Allison ended up getting this position, and I was like completely underqualified for this position. And I just, I wanted to get a name in, and I thought Raincoast was super cool, and I didn't like think much of it. But I ended up getting an interview, and I remember Dave was there and everyone was asking me all these like kind of like chill questions, like not really related to the job description. It was quantitative ecologist. So a lot of like data analysis and modeling, which I didn't really understand. And then finally Dave was there, and Dave was like, so how much experience do you have modeling and doing statistical analysis? And I was like, you got me, man. I don't know much, but I can learn. But yeah, I got contacted like a couple months after, and they had like a different role that was open, and I ended up doing like a 1-year contract, doing some like policy analysis and writing a couple reports for Raincoast, and then it kind of extended into where I am today.
Yeah, well, you've definitely talked a bit throughout the interviews about your work in the Nicola, but I was hoping that you could go into more detail and tell us about what you're doing there.
Yeah, so I could start how we got to the Nicola was that Raincoast salmon program in the past has worked primarily in the Lower Fraser from like Hope to YVR, and we were really interested in seeing what the habitat issues were like further upstream in the up the Fraser, where the salmon actually go to spawn, because a lot of our work is focused on juvenile salmon, especially Dave's, like their habitat on the estuary, and we wanted to look at where the spawning happens and also where the specific populations rear, like in stream. And yeah, we did like a bunch of digging around, and we like found the Nicola and did like a ton of research on some of the issues that the fish are facing out there. And I made like one trip out in like 2023 in March, and we met with a bunch of the First Nations there and a fisheries biologist who I'm working with now, Nathan, and we were talking about ideas, how we could work together. And that's how this work has come about. And like specifically the work is about, I would say, how climate change is affecting freshwater habitat in the Nicola River and surrounding watersheds. So the main issue there is drought. And so like not enough water in the summer, and also the water getting way too hot in the summer. And it's kind of a double whammy because the fish that live there have this really unique life history where they're actually coming back to spawn in the late summer and fall when it's like the hottest and driest. And so with climate change is kind of this very like delicate balance of them being able to adapt to this very dry, hot environment. It's, you know, they're kind of on the edge there where once climate change is, you know, drying out this watershed more and heating it up more, there's some concern that like, there's a lot of concern actually that the fish aren't able to adapt quickly enough. And so we've been like trying to find ways that we can understand the habitat and how the habitat can provide more like resilience for fish, especially with climate change. And so what we were out there doing this summer was using thermal cameras to find pockets of cold water throughout the river. And these are where groundwater is coming up and it's cooling down the river because groundwater is colder than the surface water. And this is where fish are hiding from hot water. Otherwise, they'll probably die. And so the beginning of our season was focused on finding these sites so we can map them and see whether some need like enhancement or protection. And then this latter half of the season has been trying to test different ways that we can improve the sites. So we can add structure or add shade or do different like low tech enhancements to just make them more useful for fish. And it's been like really rewarding. Yeah, it's like really cool that, I mean, it's hard to comprehend what like a groundwater outflow looks like until you get in the river and you're standing in one spot, and if you reach down and touch the water with your right hand, it's like cold. And then you reach down and touch the water with your left hand and it's warm. And, you know, if you're a fish that requires a certain temperature and will die at a certain temperature, those areas, like it really, really highlights how important they are when you're like there and you're like, oh my God, like it's so cool. Yeah.
Yeah. And could you talk more about what the research looks like? I know there's like drones involved and snorkeling involved.
Yeah. Yeah. So we have this like giant crazy drone it's got to be like 30 pounds, and it has a really cool thermal infrared camera. And so what we did was we flew it along the stream, taking a video, and spots that were colder would show up as dark blue compared to the rest of the river, which is like kind of lighter blue. And there's this huge gradient from dark blue all the way to red being really hot. And then once we would go back and watch the video and then geotag all these little spots. And then we would actually go down to the river in person and look at them, look at the sites, take water temperature readings. And also, yeah, we would snorkel them because then we could actually see one, like what the underwater habitat looks like. So whether there's lots of like nooks and crannies for fish to hide in, and also if there are fish there at all. So we actually saw a lot of fish using certain sites that we would not have been able to see if we were just walking. Even though the water is really clear, it's really amazing how much the fish blend in until you're actually like face in the water, and you can actually count how many fish in there, and you can actually look at what they're doing too. And so we were seeing a lot of like feeding behavior, which is really good because it shows that they're not like so stressed that they're just chilling and trying not to die. They're actually like actively feeding and being like curious and approaching you and that sort of thing. So that was like the real benefit of the snorkel surveys.
Do you have any favorite stories from your research in the Nicola?
Yeah, so I think my favorite is that we went out with these two Indigenous youth, Brett and Isaac. And we worked with Brett in the past. They're from CNA, which is an Indigenous organization that has a bunch of different programs, but they have a Indigenous Guardians program, which Brett and Isaac were part of. And I think my favorite was neither of them had ever snorkeled before. They've been on the river obviously a lot, and we were able to provide like wetsuits and snorkel gear. And like the first day we went out, we were at this like really nice pool with a bunch of logs, and Brett got in and immediately, like, he's kind of quiet kid, but he was like blown away, and he was like getting in the logs and like being upside down and like trying to see all the fish. And I learned the next week we came back, he'd actually bought his own gear as well and was just like going out on the weekend to go like snorkeling. And I think that was like, yeah, one of my favorite mental pictures, watching these two teens basically like splash around and like really get super stoked on like counting fish underwater.
Yeah, you inspired them. That's awesome. Okay, I'm going to turn a question back on you that you've asked a bunch of people.
Okay.
You have asked people to imagine a utopic future for the watershed that they work in.
Mm-hmm.
So I was wondering if you could describe your sort of utopic vision for the Nicola watershed. What does it look like, sound like, smell like?
Yeah, this is really hard because the Nicola has been like so impacted constantly by like floods and fires, and like there's a lot of agriculture, so there's lots of like water use. And there's just another fire like last week, and then this past week the flows have been so low that my colleague Nathan, they're seeing a lot of like pre-spawn mortality in salmon. So like fish that weren't able to lay their eggs are just dying because the water's so low. But I think like, so it's pretty bad right now, but I think that my utopian view of it would be, I just like bring it back to what one of the Guardians, Crystal, who we worked with last year, would say about the watershed, where like you hear this all the time, like you could walk on the backs of the fish. We always come down here to fish and like fill our freezers, and there'd be so many bears, and there'd be like dead fish everywhere, and there'll be, there's a lot more water, and there's a lot more like deep pools for the fish to hide in. And just like looking at the watershed now, it's very hard to imagine like it full of fish, but knowing that, some people, especially Indigenous people, have that picture of it is like really inspiring. I think that, yeah, because you would never imagine just looking at it now that there would be so many salmon in this like little dry little river that, thousands of people could go and catch fish, and there'd be enough for bears and eagles and all that stuff. Because right now there's not that many left in the river. But yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of a bittersweet vision. So I wanted to also talk to you about your work as a freelance writer for the Tyee, the National Observer, and Science World. How did you get into writing?
Yeah. I feel like I've always been interested in writing. Like I remember in being like grade 8, I would like write little short stories on my chunky laptop just for fun. And I remember like really enjoying like high school English, but I never really had a chance to like do more like non-technical scientific writing until I started like freelancing. And this was when I'd left my job at the consulting company and had like 8 months of like between jobs, and that was like really scary, but it's also let me just try random things. And yeah, I think what drew me to writing for like the Tyee and all these other outlets was kind of like the frustration I had with how scientific writing and technical writing is it's very like has to be very non-emotional and bland and very like to the point where you can't, almost make an argument. You just have to be neutral and explain the facts. And I really was like looking for an outlet to, yeah, like write opinions and write like and like back them up and have arguments and have like I put like emotions in writing, and that's kind of how I got into it. I remember I had a story idea and I pitched Jackie Wong at the Tyee, and she was like super nice and really supportive. I don't know. My first pitch was like really weird and dumb, I think. But yeah, throughout the whole, like I ended up writing like 5 or 6 pieces for them. And the whole time, like Jackie was like so supportive, and like to be able to like take a chance on just some random person cold emailing them with ideas, I thought was like, yeah, I was like so lucky to have the Tyee and her. And I think that's where the rest of the writing came from, was like I could then say I could fall back on like, hey, I wrote for the Tyee, and a lot of people, read the Tyee and they appreciate like the work they do, and your voice like holds more weight almost if you're like published in the Tyee. And so that's kind of how I got that start there.
Yeah. And could you talk a bit more about why you feel this kind of science communication is important?
Yeah, because I think, and I know we've talked about it a couple times in the podcast with other guests, that like it almost feels like, well, it does feel like the movie Don't Look Up is like not even a movie, it's like a documentary. Like
Yeah.
it's the challenge of communicating scientific facts and issues to a general audience in a way that makes them care about it is like such a big challenge. And I think that's something that scientists have not been doing a good job at, which I think is why, it's so hard for so many people to care about these like huge issues that the environment is facing. And I think it's not like the fault of regular people being like misinformed or uninformed and like not caring. I think it's, partly the fault of scientists not being able to like communicate why you should care about it, right? Like not everyone has like the mental capacity or the life, I don't know, circumstances to care about something so abstract and big. And so I think that like trying to find ways to communicate to those people is like really, really important. And I think that's how progress is going to happen, is if we reach out to more people that aren't just, people like us, but people who might be passionate about these issues if just, they heard it in the right way or they heard it in the right language, right? Yeah.
Yeah. And speaking of science communication, what has your experience been like working on this podcast?
Yeah. I feel like I've started to enjoy it more as it's gone on. The first one, I think I like over prepared, and I was like really nervous that, I don't know, I wouldn't be able to, in my mind, it didn't feel like a natural conversation. It felt like I was just like ticking through all the questions and I didn't really know how to like transition to a different topic. But as we had more and more guests, it was just, I feel like I got a better scope of like how it all works and how it's just like a conversation and how I think I thought of it less as I was like an interviewer, like a reporter, and I was just there sitting with them somewhere, maybe at like a bar, just like talking about these issues. I think that, yeah, I've enjoyed it more as it's developed. But I remember the first couple ones, I was like, oh my God, what am I doing? I'm going to have to listen to my own voice.
Yeah, well, I think something that's been really cool about this season is it feels like a lot of the people that we've had on are people that you've, heard speak at conferences and stuff and just like wanted to, yeah, be able to catch up with them at the bar and ask them questions you had. And so I think that's been really cool. For me, it's been interesting to get to sit there as the sort of silent producer. But yeah, I think you brought a lot of curiosity to those conversations, even as, someone who's working in the same fields. Yeah, I'm definitely interested in kind of what you feel like you've learned from the guests this season.
Yeah, I think like I think what was really interesting to me was how candid people were and how willing people were to like just bluntly say like we're doing bad right now, you know,
Mhm.
and like and not try to sugarcoat things for like an audience or whatever, and how that's like way more useful to hear than to hear them sugarcoat it and know that they're sugarcoating it too, and just have this like unspoken elephant in the room like, oh yeah, we're gonna be fine, and but we both know it's not gonna be fine. It was like really interesting that almost everyone had a moment where we were talking about some issue and they were just very real about how big the issue, whatever we were talking about, was, and the gravity of it. And I think that's what that was my biggest takeaway from all of them, was like we need to be very candid and real about these issues if we want to like care about them and do something.
Yeah, that's so interesting because everyone did, have moments where they were really candid about that. But I also felt like the tone of the interviews, to me, they felt pretty hopeful. And I guess I felt hopeful listening to the conversations and knowing that such sort of intelligent, caring people were working on these issues. So, yeah, I guess I'm wondering, like, did you feel any more hopeful doing the interviews?
Yeah, I think like I don't know, it's very easy to have like a misguided hope if you're just like sugarcoating everything and being like, oh, we're gonna be great, we're gonna, I don't know, it's kind of like the recycling fallacy. It's like I'm gonna recycle my water bottles and the world will be saved, and that could be called hope. But I think I did leave all the interviews pretty hopeful because, as you said, like these are really smart people who've been doing it for so long, and they've been doing it for so long. I think that's what gave me hope, was like, especially talking to Tom, right? Tom would be like, I've been working on this for 45 years. Wow. You know, I want to do that, right? And if he had no hope, he'd probably have given up and retired and gone golfing, right? Like the fact that he's done it for 45 years is just, and everyone else too, like Jason and Jessica and everybody has been doing it for so long, and they must have hope that they're making a difference and making an impact. Otherwise, they wouldn't do it, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and I think the way Tom put it too about like things will be different, but if we make the right moves and choices, maybe they will be okay. Which
Yeah.
I think is probably the best that we can hope for,
Yeah.
but that still feels like something to me, which is
Uh huh.
better than feeling like there's no way that it could be even okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Like I don't know. I think it's a lot healthier to think of it that way and not like we're gonna fix it all and everything's gonna be amazing or it's all gonna suck, right? Like we're gonna make it less bad, and that's actually like a huge accomplishment. I think when you hear some of the people communicate about like climate science and the degrees of warming, and it's like, we have so much degrees of warming locked in, and some people can be really doomerish about it and be like, oh, we're done, we're done for, the world's ending. But I think I don't know who it was, but they put it like for every increment of warming that we prevent, we save, like, I think it's like tens of thousands of lives, right? And like, you're making it less bad, but when you think about it in like people's lives, then it's like, okay, we should be doing this, right? We can't just like give up and be disillusioned.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's still very much worth doing. And so this is the last episode of season 2. I was wondering what you want listeners to take away from this season.
Yeah. I want listeners to take away just how important salmon are to people across BC. And I think we did a pretty good job of like getting people from different watersheds and different regions of BC. I wish we could have got some people on from like the Central Coast and the North Coast. But like whenever, I guess, people who aren't in fisheries or salmon biology talk to me, like I just think like my family and friends, I think the way they relate to salmon is like they're this cool fish that is in the river sometime of the year, and they eat salmon, but it's not really like the same salmon. I think I want them to take away that like, salmon are part of people's like identities and cultures and livelihoods, and like people build their entire communities around a fish. And I think that's like the fact that we all understand as biologists and people in the salmon world. I think that could be something that could be lost if, especially if you live in the city and you don't see salmon every day, and you don't, it's hard to have a connection to a salmon living in the city. Just hearing the stories from, yeah, like Tom and Jess and Murray about how their entire lives were built on salmon, I think was really interesting. It would be a good takeaway.
I guess I was wondering what's next. We've wrapped up season 2 now, basically, and you're headed back out into the field. Is your research in the Nicola kind of going to be ongoing to next year? Are you going to be working on a different project? Or
Yeah, so the Nicola work is wrapping up. I'm actually going on Thursday, and then we're wrapped up. There's a salmon festival on the weekend that's going to be like all the community's going to come, and there's going to be all these different booths and games, and Raincoast is going to have a little booth and talk about our work. And that's going to be, I think, the wrap up of the year. And we're going to hopefully be back next summer trying out more like restoration and enhancement projects. But then in October, I'm off to Healtsik territory near Bella Bella to work on this like really long-standing salmon monitoring, population monitoring project, where we walk 27 different small streams and count how many salmon we see. And that is like the best project ever, because you just get to see these like really amazing watersheds. You get to be on a boat, you get to see whales, and you get to see like oodles of salmon, and all you have to do is count them and do a lot of very horrid bushwhacking. But it's a really fun, like, it feels like we're back in like the 18 or 1900s when science was really simple and all you had to do was go out and look at things and write it down. And we live in such an like amazing little building on Denny Island, and yeah, so I'm really excited for that. That's next.
how does one go about counting salmon anyway?
Yeah, with your eyes. So you basically, there's 4 of us that will walk a stream, and 2 people will be the lead, and they'll count all the live fish with a clicker. And you just have to count, when they're thick and there's lots of them, you have to just make estimates of, I think this is 100, and then 100, 200, 300, 400. But when they're one by one, and they're also moving, so it's really hard. I've actually never counted the live ones. I've always been in charge of counting the dead ones, which is way easier. And yeah, the 2 trail people, they are walking the stream as well and just counting dead fish. And you split the stream in half in the middle. One person takes the right bank, one person takes the left bank. And yeah, we have clickers. Usually we'll have like 4 different clickers dangling on our necks for different categories of fish. You don't need to memorize like 4 different numbers. And then at the end of the stream, we all write down a notebook, and then it gets uploaded onto Excel spreadsheet. It's like very low tech.
Wow.
Yeah.
That sounds really challenging.
Yeah. And we're also in there at like the peak of the run when all the bears are around too. And so we're like also looking down at the river, but also looking up and like yelling and making noise. Like our bear call for some reason is Yogi, and we don't want to say hey bear, because if you hear the word bear, some people might like think there's an actual bear. And so yeah, it's like a bunch of us like crashing through the woods, yelling like Yogi and like clicking our clickers, and that's it.
Amazing.
Yeah.
So one thing I really enjoyed about this season was it felt like you got a lot of genuine sort of career advice from the guests.
I know, I was so lucky.
Yeah, you were really like picking their brains about their careers. And I think it was really helpful. I'm sure it would be helpful for listeners who are interested in going into sciences. And so I wanted to pose the question to you about what advice would you have for young people who are interested in a career in, I guess, conservation, maybe salmon conservation?
Yeah. Speaking as an old timer who has 4 years of work under his belt, I would say, I think what really helped me was like not being afraid of like knocking on doors, like real doors and also like virtual doors, and it's just introducing yourself. And especially in undergrad, I volunteered for like a lot of different labs and got a lot of different experience just by walking around the biology building and knocking on office hours doors and being like, do you guys need a hand in the lab? Or just like cold emailing people. I think like I initially was like really scared of doing that and like, oh, what if I get rejected? And if you get rejected, there's nothing will change, right? But if somebody, all you need is like one person to take a chance on you, and you won't know that unless you just like send that email, right? Like that's kind of how my relationship with Tai started. That's kind of how Raincoast started. Was I applied to a job I had no business applying to. So yeah, I think like don't be scared to just like when there's like no harm in doing so, just like put yourself out there, do the small little things like emailing random profs, and yeah.
Yeah, totally. I think I told this story last season when I interviewed Chelsea, who was the host for season 1. But yeah, I just emailed someone from the communications team at Raincoast about volunteering, and he was like, oh, I think you have too much experience to volunteer, but you could freelance, do some stuff for us. And it eventually turned into being able to produce the podcast, which is awesome. So, and Raincoast was something that like had always been held up at like my house growing up as like the epitome.
Oh, really? That's so cool.
Yeah, of a conservation group. And so, yeah, my dad is very chuffed that I'm doing this, but yeah, I totally, and same for me, because I've written for the Taiyu before too, and it's like pitching is very scary, but editors are really like happy to get interesting pitches usually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the worst thing that can happen is they just say no, and then that's okay. It took you like half an hour to type an email out.
Yeah, and such a big part, I mean, I'm coming from more of the writing side of things, but such a big part is like getting rejected and learning how to bounce back from that. And so I think that's really a good advice for any fields. I also wanted to ask, how can listeners support Raincoast's work?
Oh, you can donate on our website. We have a normal donate button like every other charity. You can subscribe to our newsletter. You could follow us on our social media. We're trying to do more events that are open to the public that people can come to, and coming out and connecting with us and just like showing us that real people are out there that support our work, I think is like really meaningful, even if it's not like money or like other funding support. I think it's a lot of us, especially because we work remote and we're kind of all spread out. It like really means a lot when we can see that like real life people support our work, can see our work and appreciate it and care about it, right? Like that, if you don't have the resources to donate, like just knowing that there are people out there that care about our work, I think is like super cool, right? And it's just like motivating. Otherwise it feels like you're just working in a vacuum, and especially when you're working on these big issues that like you're trying to like persuade government and things, it can feel like you're the only voice that's fighting for these things. But when you hear that support from the public, it's like, okay, yeah, we have like people behind us, right?
Well, I will ask the question we've been asking everyone, which is, why are salmon more than a fish?
I kind of don't want to steal everyone else's answers. I think salmon are more than a fish because no other fish would have caused me to move across the country to a place that I've never been to where I have no friends and family, to work on studying them and recovering them. And yeah, no other fish species would have spurred me to do that. And I know a lot of people have the same story where just they're so interesting from like a biological standpoint, from a cultural standpoint, from like an economic standpoint, that they will cause people to move from far, far, far away just to come and have the chance to work with them. I think that is really cool. And yeah, I mean, without salmon, I'd still be on Ontario. I don't know what I'd be doing. I probably wouldn't be as happy. So I have salmon to thank for being out here.
Yeah. Salmon change lives lots of different ways.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for joining me, Austin, and thank you for all your work on this season.
Thank you. This is awesome. I want to acknowledge that this episode was recorded on unceded Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh lands.
Raincoast Radio is hosted by Auston Chhor and produced by me, Sofia Osborne. This podcast is a production of Raincoast Conservation Foundation, a team of conservationists and scientists empowered by research to protect the lands, waters, and wildlife of coastal British Columbia. Learn more and support our work at raincoast.org.